Guests are with me right now at the table. Johnson Chukwu is the Chief Executive Officer at Cowry Asset Management. He's to my immediate right. Welcome to the show, Mr. Chukwu. How are you?
I'm good. And you?
I did, yeah. Taiwo Oyedele is a partner and West Africa tax leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Mr. Oyedele, welcome to the program.
Thanks.
In fact, welcome to our station.
Yes.
Yes, your first time on AIT.
Yeah.
Welcome. I think after the show, you tell me your feedback.
No problem.
Welcome both of you from Lagos, isn't it? I was chatting with you on the guest room before we entered. I said, I hope Lagos is not as hot as Abuja. Abuja is very hot. We're oscillating around 40 to 41 degrees Celsius. And I'm wondering, in fact, the ACs, they're not the catch again. What's the Lagos weather like?
I think Lagos weather is ranging in the neighborhood of 36, 38 degrees centigrade. Certainly, it has to be. It can't be as hot as Abuja. Of course, we know Lagos is a coastal city, so the wind blowing from the south through the Atlantic Ocean kind of help to moderate the weather in Lagos, unlike here that's an arid location.
And I think, from time you would expect Abuja will be hotter than Lagos,
yes,
but I think both Abuja and Lagos are now hotter than they used to be. Maybe this is global warming.
Thank you, because I thought about it. In fact, yesterday I was saying at home, I said, this climate change is really something else. But let's see, that will be a discussion for another day in terms of perhaps climate business and all of that. But the wind is blowing, this economic headwind. You're laughing where I'm taking it from. This wind, and IMF just, puts the toppings on the cake yesterday for us. I don't know if you saw the IMF Article IV consultation report that has been released, because we see IMF team, they come to Nigeria after they meet with our officials and all of that, and they go back and they put their reports together. Like what I said at the beginning of the program, for me, when I read that report, it's not far from what we used to say as economic analysts, or what my guests tell me here on the program. What I just saw is just an aggregate of all our problems or what we should do and all of that. Let me start with Mr. Oyedele. What do you think, really? What do you think?
Yeah, so you're right. There's nothing there that is surprising. It's just like summarizing all of it. I think the issues we have, I don't think that it's just about telling us what the problems are anymore. It's about Nigeria saying, how do we begin to solve these problems? And in trying to solve the problems, we need to first and foremost have priorities. There are problems that you solve, and they have bigger impact than others. I think many times our leaders are too focused on making political statements, so they want to do something that they can put in the press, and the impact might be very insignificant. So if you take unemployment, for example, if you deal with all the unemployment today and you deal with power, two problems solved, but the impact on society will be massive. So maybe instead of government having 10-point agenda, 15 points agenda, maybe they should just have two and deal with that, and then let's move forward from there. But I think overall, nothing new from the report. It's about how do we solve the problems.
Okay, guys, if we have the summary of that report that we did put together, please, if we can just take it on the screen so that our viewers can actually see what the IMF is saying on the Nigerian economy. Mr. Chukwu, tell me your view. So many things talked about. They even entered the banking sector, AMCON, revenue challenges, infrastructure deficits, fiscal challenges, policy and governance issues, so many things. All volatility, inflation, MPC's stance on monetary policy, CBN's intervention in forex market. I can go on and on.
Well, let's start from the summary of what the report said. And that summary says that, look, the downside risk of the Nigerian economy is high, and that the prospects is muted, which means the upside potential is muted, which means the likelihood that the economy will grow at a much faster rate is weaker than the possibility we will slip back into a recession or very slow economic growth rate. And that's a defining statement they made, and which should be a clarion call to the policymakers. If in an economy the outlook is such that the likelihood that you will slip into the negative is higher than that you will actually grow. So the key thing that they also came down to mentioning some of the key areas we need to address. Of course, we know the economy growing at 1.91% that we recorded in last year is what make a very fragile growth. That was driven, like you pointed out in your introduction, by the non-oil sector that grew by 2.7%. But if you look at that non-oil sector, the threats ordinary sector is also elevated. Look at the major contributor to the ordinary sector, which is the agricultural sector, which accounts for about 25% of the GDP. The agricultural sector still is facing major risk associated with insurgency and instability, insecurity in the north, which is a major base where our agricultural output is coming from. So you need to recognize that should the insecurity situation in the northeast worsen, and that had now spread to the north center and northwest, then the agricultural sector may suffer slower growth rate if it doesn't tip to negative. So if that happens, then the economy will slip back into negative. Of course, we know the oil and gas sector, which account for oil and mining and that account for about 9% of the GDP is still in negative. The other sector that accounts for 16% of the GDP, which is trade, is also in negative. And then the next one is manufacturing, which is also very weak growth. So if you look at the sector that actually contributing the greater percentage of the GDP, they are all in either facing threat of unraveling or are still in the negative territory. So when they tell you that your downside risk is higher, you can see clearly that if we do nothing, we're obviously doing that. We are living by the day. We are hoping that oil price will remain strong at $68, above $68.
Which they also said in the report that oil prices are forecast or predicted to still rise because of the global political disruption.
So basically, we are only hoping that fortune will continue to smile on us, and not that we're going to take necessary measures that will drive economic stability and economic growth. Like Taiwo did, like he pointed out, there are certain things that as a country we should recognize that it's not working for us. You can have an economy where you produce crude and you export only crude and import refined petroleum products. And there's nothing that has stopped refineries from coming up in this country other than the fact that we have refused to take out the subsidy of petroleum products. You are spending about 1.5 trillion naira on subsidy. When the entire your works housing and the three combined ministries
and
power, and then you add the other sector that are critical to your economy, are getting less than half of that amount you're spending on infrastructure, on subsidy. And you want to continue that, hoping that Dangote refinery will come on stream. But we fail to recognize that Dangote refinery is an export-oriented refinery. It's being set up in a location that's outside our customs zone. So it's going to export refined products to Nigeria. You will still, granted that the income will go to a Nigerian, but Nigeria will still have to import refined petroleum products. But why can't we just address that singular issue? And that will lead to domestication of oil and gas sector. He did mention the issue of power sector. The reality is that the power sector has failed to achieve commercial viability. I mean, the power sector reforms have failed to achieve commercial viability. What we're doing is massaging the wound instead of addressing the fundamental structural deficiency that has made it not achieve commercial viability. If we don't address that, we're going to remain in darkness for the next God knows how long. So these are things that any policy maker or policy driver should focus on and take out some of these issues, and then we should begin to see an economy that will grow on a more sustainable basis.
Now, Mr. Oyedele, you know, when I was reading these reports, I was just torn between the economic sense of it and perhaps the political angle to it, in the sense that why hasn't the Nigerian economy moved the way it should move? Is it that we have more of politics or political shenanigans disrupting our economic growth in terms of, you understand what I mean? Because even as we're discussing there, some may be watching and saying, okay, oh no, you people are painting Nigeria the way it should not be, or there are some reforms, because we are really torn between all of that. So do you understand what I mean? You want to respond to that?
Yeah, indeed. I think it's a combination of so many factors. But if I want to summarize it, I'll say they are self-inflicted pains. So whatever Nigeria is going through, it's because Nigeria created those problems, which also means that in solving those problems, they have to come from Nigeria. It will not be the IMF, it will not be the United Nations. I know Nigerians are very religious, so it's not God to solve the problems because they were created by man. And what do I mean by that? So if you think about it, and he spoke about the growth now, Nigeria is growing at less than 2% or about 2%.
Yes, 2.38%.
But population growth is around 3%.
Yes.
So what that means is, since we started this program, we have more people that have entered poverty. than now, than previously. So which is why we're now the world capital of poverty. Now, the reason why that is the case is because Nigeria is not creating wealth. We're not creating successes. We're not creating prosperity for individuals, for businesses, whether they're multinational, whether they're local. And this is as a result of a combination of different factors, from monetary policy to fiscal policy to trade policies to even the political environment. Now, because, for example, if you don't have investors' confidence, what happens is you don't see the flow of capital. And when people are not investing, they are not creating wealth. Government is talking about revenue now, and I did some analysis a couple of days ago, which I thought was quite interesting. So what I did was look at the federal government's budget. And looking at federal government's budget, they're saying, well, actually, they still need to come up with supplementary budget because of the new minimum wage. There's still the problem of fuel subsidy. The amount we have in the budget for 2019 will not be sufficient to pay the fuel subsidy if we continue. There's a report that says in the past 13 years, we spent 10 trillion naira on fuel subsidy, which, if you ask me, I would say the benefit has not gone to the people. So we can as well just take it off. But if you park that by the side, what I found is the amount that the federal government is spending to just service our debt is humongous. It's more than 1/3 of our revenue. Now, at the state level, which sometimes we don't pay attention to, I look at the budget of all the 36 states in Nigeria combined, and it was about 9 trillion budget of what they want to spend this year. Interestingly, last year, all the states made about 936 billion naira in IGR. Yeah. And then they shared about 2.5 trillion from the federal allocation. Yeah. So altogether, let's say it's 3.5 trillion. Where are they supposed to get the difference from between 3.5 trillion and 9 trillion? At the end of the day, if you look at their operating recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure, you see actually their recurrent expenditure is about 3.8 trillion, actually more than the money they're going to make. Yeah. So, and you cannot solve the problem of poverty without addressing issues around infrastructure, without addressing issues around policies. Government also sometimes erroneously think that our problem will be solved if they can just make more money. But more money is just a component of the equation. The bigger factor is fix the policy environment. The reason why we're importing refined product is because of policies, bad policies. The reason why electricity is not stable is because of bad policies, because the tariff is not market reflective. Nobody on earth is going to invest their money just because they love Nigerians. Not even Nigerians will do that. Investors and business people invest because they're looking to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in the process of making money, you solve society's problem and everybody is happy for it. So this combination of issues are things that our politicians must tackle head on. We have the ERGP, which is a fantastic document, but I worry about how we implement it. We seem to choose and pick what we like to implement, whereas all the components are supposed to work together to be able to take Nigeria out of.
I'm even wondering if we're implementing it at all, because I get to hear or I get to read something on ERGP. When the ministers talk, I see them saying something else. Yeah. So I'm wondering if there's really that synergy, or if there's a remembrance to what they're saying. Actually, do you understand what I mean?
Yes, yes.
Now, you've raised some important points that our problems are man-made and all of that. For me, like I said on Monday, it's actually even depressing for me sometimes, because if you take a look, I've been doing this now for over how many years? For over a decade. And it seems we're still saying the same thing over and over and over again. The World Bank will tell us the same thing. IMF will come say the same thing. Everybody will come say the same thing. My analyst here will say the same thing. Yet there's little progress, because even the IMF said yesterday that the growth that we're seeing is not enough to reduce poverty and joblessness. I think I was chatting with you on Monday, Mr. Chukwu, when we talked about the misery index, for example. You know, Nigerians are the 6th most miserable people in the world. Even as I'm sitting there, I'm miserable. Forget all this makeup. Yes, I'm actually miserable, because when you go on the street, you see a lot of things that make you miserable. For people that are unemployed, though I have to also say it that yesterday, I think the Federal Executive Council, yes, yesterday, isn't it? Yes, approved about 5.5 billion naira for creation of additional 12,000 jobs. But just like you said, if we're taking a look at our growth rate, we're growing at about 2.38%, our last GDP growth. But our population growth is over 3%. The last time I checked, 3.5%. It's still in the negative. With this that the federal government is doing, creating additional 12,000 jobs in the Empower scheme, that will cost about 5.5 billion naira. Is it, you know, I don't even know what to say again, because are they really tackling this unemployment issue? Because it's already a time bomb. I think it has even exploded. It's not waiting to explode, because we are seeing implosions. We are seeing the symptoms everywhere. Mr. Chukwu?
In the first place, there are two ways to create jobs. And I look at what the government is doing and what should be done. Creating jobs in the public sector is not, for me, the way to go. There's a limit to what the public sector can do. If you look at the Empower, where they're talking of creating 12,000
more jobs. Yes.
So you need to look at how many jobs have they really created so far with the investment they made in the Empower. Do we have champions that they can now signpost to the whole world and say, look, these guys got this seed capital and this is what they've achieved with it? We need to look at that. But then, why are we not looking at growing the sectors of the economy that should create jobs? I did mention the issue of oil and gas sector, the downstream oil and gas sector. If you have refineries in this country, you're going to have petrochemical industries. You will have pharmaceutical industry. You are going to have plastic industries. All these industries draw their input, raw materials from the petroleum refining. Then why are we not looking at that? You have several other sectors. Okay, let's look at agriculture or solid minerals. Why are we not building the supporting infrastructure that will enable some of the raw material we produce to be to enjoy some level of benefication, some level of value addition in the country? Why are we still hoping that we'll continue to export raw materials and diversify the economy and create jobs? What are those sectors of the economy where we can create jobs easily? The manufacturing sector today accounts for about 9% of the GDP. That, for a country that has a population of about 180 million, will not be sufficient to create jobs. One of the things other countries have done is that they look at the size of their population and they define how they want to focus their economy. Do you want to be a service-driven economy or a manufacturing-based economy? With most countries with large population, which is also the reasons why somebody like Trump is saying bring back the jobs. Most large populated economies in the world, like China, India, are focused on those sectors of the economy that can create jobs. We're not doing that. I'm not even seeing any clearly defined policy that is targeted at growing the sector of the economy that we have competitive advantage. In the past, under Obasanjo's government, we shouldn't ever forget the fact that, look, we used to be one of the largest importers of cement in the world. We, as a matter of policy, have been able to turn the tide, and now we are in a position to export cement. It was based on policy. We can replicate that in several other sectors. One, the government must define the policies, create incentives. Granted, some people will become rich from that, but it's not a crime if you create an environment that creates wealth and that.
Is it a crime to become rich?
You see, because it seems that the orientation
to be poor. If you say it's a crime to become rich,
it looks like the orientation we now have here. We should celebrate poverty. That poverty is now, if you are rich, you are a criminal. Yeah, you're a criminal. If you are poor, you are a honest person. So that's not where to go. It is, we should stimulate the economy so that entrepreneurs who are ready to bet their capital, put in their energy, put in their intellectual capacity, can create value. And
are you not encouraged with pockets of policies you're seeing around, like agriculture, like central bank, for example, intervention, like the Anchors Borrowers program and all of that, you know, that has made now rice availability of Nigeria. This your smile is saying something else. I will let me allow you ruminate on that. Let me bring it, Mr. Oyedele.
Yes. I smile also because I thought it was interesting. You know, when it comes to policy, it's not like you have a list of things you want to go and buy in the market, and sometimes if you can only afford 2 out of 10, you say, well, I'm making some progress. Policies don't work that way. It has to be connected. Now, I'll give you some, analysis. And I agree with him. So government creating 12,000 employment. In fact, I would like to say government is creating 12,000 underemployment, because I would imagine all those guys that have been employed are being underemployed. But let's even park that aside. 12,000 is a drop in the ocean when your unemployment plus underemployment is over 40%
Yes.
of about 80 million active
People.
workforce.
Yes.
So you're talking about well over 30 million. So how much is 12,000? It's a drop in the ocean. But if you look at it, we have over 30 million MSMEs. Someone who is the only person, MD, managing director, clerk, and everything in their company. You have a lot of them.
Yes.
Imagine you create the right environment for them, and each of those guys just employ one more person. That's 30 million employment already you've created. So, but how can government do that? My wife runs a small business in Lekki, and then just last week, there was a notice that was pasted all over the place by a Lekki concession company, and they said, remove all your billboards and everything within 14 days. I said, this is even a private sector company that has a concession with government, issuing orders and directives, even though the levy for that thing has been paid to Lagos state government. Now, this is hardship, part of the hardship of doing business. It's almost like a crime when you set up a business. You see, tax people will come, regulators will come, permit people will come. Some people are even non-state actors. But with the
Lagos,
support
the
of politicians, yes, they also come and harass you. So if you put all of this together, what you get from it is to say, the only way government can really solve our problems is to fix the policies in a coherent and consistent manner. It's not a policy you bring out this week, in 2 months' time, you bring out another one, or you bring in someone who is a cabinet member, a minister, and doesn't understand what the policy directions are. That will not solve Nigeria's problem.
How do you think President Buhari should address this now? Since he's been re-elected, his new tenure, the second term, should start next month or so. Should President Buhari's approach be different right now to the economy? Like someone told me on the show on Monday, Dr. Male, he told me that President Buhari should go all out this time. He doesn't have anything to lose. He's not going to be seeking re-election again. So he should be very hard and face the economy and do what is right. How do you think President Buhari should approach this? While we come back to the other question, which you smiled.
Well, I think it will start from his selection of the selection of his cabinet members. That for me is the first thing. Nobody has competence in all aspects of human endeavor. I understand his competence area is not in finance or economy. So, but there are a lot of Nigerians who are very competent in that sector. So the first thing he has to do is look at who should man some of the critical economic sectors. The Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. Those are critical sectors of the economy. He has to outsource the manning of Ministry of Petroleum Resources to somebody else who can do the job.
He shouldn't be
He must be willing, and I use the word must be willing, to accept, like Obasanjo did in his second term, that statism is no longer a viable economic option. And I repeat myself, that the president must accept that statism is no longer a viable economic option in today's world. So the idea of the state will provide everything is not feasible. And I give you one of the critical orientation of the government that says that the government believes that the state is the one that should provide our resources. If you cast your mind back to the last government's concession of the, what do you call it, Second Niger Bridge.
Niger Bridge, yes.
Second Niger Bridge was concession to the private sector, of which Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority was the anchor concessionaire, with Gilead Beja and all those things. And they were supposed to bring in funders funds to build that infrastructure and recover the investment over a period of time and make some reasonable level of income. But that was reversed and now brought into the budget. And then the government is funding it by allocating maybe 5 billion, 10 billion per annum. And for that project, if you're putting 10 billion every year, it's going to take you more than 10 years to build it. Remember, you are dealing with mob and demob. You mobilize them, they demobilize when the money has run out of money, and they will cause variation. So the reality is that we could have allowed private sector to build that. Today, that road would have been that bridge would have been viable with the auxiliary road. The government must change its mindset from the state we have to do it, because the state has highly limited resources. If you look at what happened last year, the government budgeted 7.16 trillion naira's federal government revenue. It only got 3.909 trillion. By September, the government deficit was 3.7 trillion. just almost 100% of total revenue. And then the rest was funded by borrowing. So the reality is that the government, now we are talking of about 2.2 trillion in debt service, which will increase further if we have to continue to try to fund critical infrastructure.
And DMO says we're going to borrow.
Yes.
About 1.65 trillion.
And even the Minister of National Planning said that we should expect that the budget deficit will widen.
It will widen.
And when it widens, it simply means the government has to borrow. And like Taiwo mentioned earlier, you're also dealing with an increase in overhead. The government has already budgeted 4 trillion this year for overhead. Non-debt service overhead. Then 2.2 trillion for debt service. That's already 6.2 trillion. If you compare that to their budgeted 6.9 trillion revenue, we already say that, assuming they even achieve the revenue, it will be entirely consumed by recurrent expenditure and debt service. So the reality is that the government must come, the president must accept that, look, we do not have the financial resources to develop this economy if we continue with the current model. That the concept of handout to poor people, like say, okay, let's maintain fuel subsidy that the poor do not suffer. The poor is already suffering. There are better ways we can use the resources that is now committed to service to subsidizing something like petroleum products that will more positively affect the poor, though the poor might go through a momentary period of difficulties. But in the case we're waiting for that difficulty, I always say this, it's like somebody who had a fracture and you don't want to go for both setting, and you hope that you continue to massage it with Vaseline and rub, and hoping that it will go. Eventually it will deteriorate. And that's what we're saying. We are not dealing with 90 million people who are extremely poor. And on a daily basis, we're
How about the argument of the government that during the Jonathan days, 112 million people were poor? Now it's been brought down to 87 million people, though we are the world's capital of poverty. My
approach to that is slightly different, and it's very simple. You don't take up leadership position to hold yourself to whatever had happened in the past. Leadership is about the future. You're not going to reverse what happened in the past. The people are demanding that your tenure should lead to an improvement in their welfare and well-being. You cannot convince them, or it can't be a matter of consolation to tell them, look, you used to be in a worse situation. The kids are asking for improvement, and that human life is all about the tomorrow must be better than today. So the government must accept the fact that we can't continue to be beholden by what happened in the past. We are now facing the future. Children born today are not interested in what happened under Jonathan or what happened under Obasanjo or what happened under Shagari. They are interested in what will happen tomorrow in their life.
Mr. Oyedele, you want to comment?
We hold ourselves to a very low standard, which is very disappointing. So each time I hear government talk about the past administration, I find it personally extremely disappointing. We had 112 million people in poverty during Jonathan's time. Indian at the time, with over 1 billion people, had more than 112. Fast forward 3-4 years, India has removed a lot of people from poverty, such that even at our 80-something million people in poverty, we are now the world capital. Exactly. With less than one fourth of their population. Yes. So we should not be comparing ourselves with the past. We should say, where are we supposed to be today as a nation, given the human resources, material resources, and all the things we have. And I made that point carefully the other time, that the problems we have are self-inflicted. If you think about it and you say, government, you're not the one to create jobs. Just create the right policy environment. If you create the right policy environment, the private sector will drive the economy. America produces more than 10 million barrels of crude oil per day. They don't call themselves an oil-producing country. They don't even have a national oil company. They make more than 5 trillion from taxes, 5 trillion US dollars from taxes every year from all levels of government. Where do they get the money from? By taxing the Apples, the Googles. When your businesses and your people are prosperous, taxes is a consequence of it. It just happens naturally. The money that we budgeted for the entire federal government budget is less than the revenue that Apple will make in 3 months. Yes. So how can we create enterprises in Nigeria and businesses that will thrive, employ people, create wealth, and then pay taxes?
Even if we say, fine, let's since we're even an oil-producing nation, we're not even maximizing the value chain of that oil. If you take a look at, was it this week or earlier this week, Saudi Aramco, for example, has overtaken Apple in terms of how much, yes, in terms of capitalization. So you're looking, Saudi Aramco is the oil company of Saudi Arabia. You just mentioned that even the US does not have a national oil company. And I like that you brought that in, because a lot of people, US imports a lot of crude oil too. So people don't even think that US produces even more than, sometimes even more than Saudi Arabia sometimes. So
it's currently producing more than Saudi
Arabia. More than Saudi Arabia. So you're taking a look at the deficiency in everything we are currently saying. You are a tax expert. FIRS raked in about 5 trillion naira last year. It says it wants to make about 8 trillion naira this year. Where will that tax come from? Fowler and the rest of them, will they be pursuing people like us or people on the streets?
Yeah, so you see, life doesn't work like that, unfortunately. So, and on this point you made about Saudi Aramco, you know that if you think about Nigeria, compare NLNG, Nigeria LNG, with NNPC. These are big organizations in the petroleum sector, run and managed by Nigerians. But what's the difference between the two? NLNG is very well run, very efficient, very profitable. One of the most profitable in Africa. NNPC is supposed to be many times the size of NLNG, but what do we get from them? Losses. Now, the difference between the two is, at NLNG, you find people are appointed based on competence, and they have a framework for assessing the performance of the people. At NNPC, I think in the past 7 years, we had like maybe 5 GMDs.
It's even more, I think.
Before you even settle down to understand the job, they fire you and bring someone to come and do politics. I think in 1 year, we've had like 3 MDs or so. That will not help us. Yeah. Now, back to the question of tax revenue. So it's true that FRS collected 5.3 trillion naira in 2018, and in nominal terms is the highest in our history. What they are not telling you in that story is that a big component of that, about 50%, comes from oil taxes. Now, 2 things. Oil taxes wasn't FRS that collected it. You don't need the FRS to collect the oil taxes. NNPC will lift and sell it, and it goes into Federation accounts. And then the PPT, the companies will pay, because there are a few of them and they're big. And number 2, if you take the dollar equivalent of the amount we collected last year to naira at about 3, even if you use 305, compared to, say, in 2012, when it was like 160 something, we have not even met the dollar amount. Now, we're in 2019. The average price for last year was over $70. We'll be lucky if we get to that for this year. Let's just say we even get to $70. Where would the FRS make the difference between 5.3 and 8 trillion from non-oil? Where would it come from? It's not going to happen. And I've said before, until Nigeria gets to a point where, and this is also a policy matter, all over the world, if you take in the US, the top 1% of society pays more taxes than the bottom 90%. In the UK, the top 1% pays more than the bottom 75%. In South Africa, the top 1% pays more than the bottom 99%. The more the inequality in society, the more the 1% will pay more than the entire population combined. In Nigeria, guess who is paying the taxes? The people at the bottom of the ladder. And then we say tax to GDP ratio, by the way, is low. Why would it not be low? Because the people 6%. That have the ability to pay are not even paying. People in politics, from National Assembly to governors and the rest of them, are not even paying. So recently, the electoral bill that wasn't signed, I was glad that it wasn't signed, and my major reason for that was they have removed the requirement for tax clearance certificate as a precondition for vying for position. So what does it say to you? The Constitution is very clear. Every Nigerian must declare their income honestly and pay their taxes. You are saying, by the way, Constitution did not say TCC. Is the Constitution supposed to go and write it there that you need tax clearance certificate? Isn't that an evidence of you paying your taxes? And if people who are leading us are not themselves compliant with taxes, then we should forget about all these stories.
Mr. Chukwu, let me give you 30 seconds to respond to what you were smiling at before.
The agricultural...
Or has events overtaken that?
No, well, if the agricultural sector, the improvement in rice production, the challenge I actually have, there's no doubt there's been some improvement in rice production, but we've not gotten to a point where Nigeria is producing enough rice to feed Nigerians as being presented before the government. If you go to virtually all the major eateries, they serve you foreign rice. So where is it coming in if we're not importing foreign rice? It's not only when you access dollar from the official window that you can import. Remember that you can also access dollar from alternative market. And I believe the rice is coming in, what we are eating, most eateries and most hotels are foreign rice. We are not yet seeing Nigerian rice in those.
Okay. All right, just before we go, let's quickly take this comment on Twitter. Borean Lai is saying, good day everyone. If Nigeria is going to face acute hunger in 2019, I'm wondering why you have no agriculture and climate professionals on this. Okay, Kennedy Igwe on Twitter says, Nancy, good morning. Please help me greatly thank your guest analysts, Johnson and Taiwo, for their spot-on analysis. I've learned so much from them, but it's surprising to see you all in black. Was it planned? And it's true, we're all in black. Are we mourning? Like I said before.
Maybe the issues we're discussing require wearing black.
Wearing black, yes, because I said before that I'm actually miserable. Another comment from Chris is saying, you are not miserable. You are not miserable, and I don't think you will be. In any case, let's keep putting pressure and providing directions for those whose duty it is to make things better